And we can think that as humans, we have a tendency to fixate on things, to try to stabilize things, to negate the aspect that reality and the world is completely dynamic, is always changing. The flux of everything is the way that things go about in the world, and that we are very resistant to change because of that, the way that we're wired, because of the way that we understand and we see the world. I think psychedelics on a very fundamental level show us that change is an inherent part of nature. It's an inherent part of reality in a way. And death is this ultimate change process, if you will.
Christopher Timmermann works at the Psychedelic Research Group in Imperial College London. He's a psychologist educated at the Catholic University of Chile with a master's in neuroscience and neuropsychological therapy from the University of Bologna. Christopher's interest in the study of dimethyltryptamine, aka DMT, is centered on its ability to generate a significant change in the state of consciousness and the relationship this has with its effects in the brain. Christopher led, designed, and conducted the research of a study that revealed a strong overlap between DMT and near-death experiences. This study proposes that an understanding of both the psychology and neurobiology of dying by using psychedelics to model it may have implications for how we view this most inevitable and universal phenomenon, potentially promoting a greater familiarity with and healthy acceptance of it. In this episode, we talk with Christopher about the link between psychedelics and death, the characteristics of near-death experiences, and how psychedelics show us that change is an inherent part of nature, with death being the ultimate change we face. Please support the show by liking and sharing this episode on social media, and to make sure you don't miss out on any future episodes, please sign up for our newsletter at deathhangout.com. It would also be a massive help to us if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, which you can do right now by simply clicking on the subscribe button. Now, let's delve into this episode, Face Death with Psychedelics.
I'm fascinated about two subjects. First subject is obviously death, but the second subject is psychedelics. Myself, I've been experiencing ayahuasca in Brazil, and I've seen the power of this. Power is a big word, but the effect of this plant. It's very helpful. Actually, it helped me. So I'm not advocating anything, but from my experience, this ayahuasca experience did something positive. It's funny enough because ayahuasca and death, they are interlinked, meaning that many people who used ayahuasca will mention that they had this experience of dying, and it was difficult, challenging, dreadful. They were scared. They were like crying. But at the end of the day, it was extremely good. It was like, wow, it was amazing. And that made me think better about my life, and I reassess my priorities, and they really liked this experience. When I've heard about your studies, that you study DMT, which is one of the components, I think, of ayahuasca, dimethyltryptamine, and you study also the effect, you said that there's a link about near-death experience, so I was very curious about that. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, there's always, through the history of Western use in psychedelics, there's always been this connection with death. So Timothy Leary, who's one of the first kind of like peoples in the West who popularized the use of psychedelics, mentions in one of his texts that the first thing that comes to mind in one of his experiences was this death was everywhere, and the TV was saying death, 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 and so on. Raymond Moody, the person who coined the term near-death experience, in his book, which I think is called Life After Death or something like this.
Is it Life After Life? Something like
Life After Life, yeah. Yeah, Life After Life. He makes the connection that psychedelic substances and these mystical type experience induced by psychedelic substances has a strong link with what people go through in near-death experiences as well. Then you have things not from this context, like, for example, ayahuasca use, Ayahuasca, the literal translation from Quechua means the vine of the dead. So that's another pretty obvious connection. And finally, there's the really amazing work happening at Johns Hopkins University and New York University, in which patients with terminal illness that have a psychological distress because of they know that they're going to die, they're setting up these trials in which they have an important experience with a high dose psychedelic, in this case psilocybin, and it helps them go through this process, which has not only effects on the individual but also the people around the individual. There's also, again, this collective element that's hugely interesting, hugely relevant in this way. And there's a very intriguing aspect coming out of this, which is, I think, is kind of like related to what you guys do with the show, which in a way it's psychedelics puts the theme of death to the forefront, apparently. And this, appears to be kind of like, what's happening in the phenomenology, the experience, and so on.
How does that help in terms of the Johns Hopkins studies that you were talking about? What did they find? Is this something they've started, or is it something they're looking at doing, or if they have, what did they find?
Yeah, so they found that people that have like high levels of distress because of this, distress meaning high levels of anxiety or low levels of mood, they see very, very significant improvement that lasts a long time. So it can help people face these processes of death. There's also a process of alienation that happens not only by the individuals themselves, but the system surrounding them, so people surrounding the individuals. There's an element of that is hard for them to come to terms that their loved one will die.
Okay.
The alienation process going on, and through this experience and what it does, there's a way in which this experience of death is somehow re-signified, if you will. It's reframed.
So obviously there's going to be a physiological sort of chemical change as a result. But is it more about the sort of the intellectual, if you like, interpretation of it now? Is there something in that that's changed? Is it more how people shift, or is it, has anyone discussed their experience and how it shifted their perspective? I suppose that's what's intriguing me.
It's really about, I would say, at the psychological level, it's about really the perspective that people have on the idea of death or on their own personal death. It's very logical to think that there might be biological mechanisms that are underlying this change of perspective. So the changes in mood, the changes in anxiety, may be linked to this notion that people are now accepting the notion of death a bit more. And it makes a lot of sense that is the case.
You've been studied yourself. You had like a group study where you had like people who had placebo and have another group who had, I assume, DMT. Did they report that? So did report this kind of, okay, I experienced death myself, or, experienced my death, and, I'm feeling better, I kind of, for death, or what are the effects?
So in our study, what we did is that we gave the same people DMT and placebo, and then we gave them this near-death experience questionnaire, which is widely used in research. It has been used for over 30 years now. And what we saw was that when looking at the levels of near-death experience, if you will, like the actual questionnaire quantifies the degree according to these experiential features that you're having in your death experience, we saw that all of them were scoring above this threshold. And the theme of death popped up in quite a few of the interviews, not in all of the subjects, but in quite a few of them. So we saw this result, and we thought it was really, really interesting. It hasn't been studied with other substances or in other experiences, but they might induce this sort of like near-death-like experiences. So we then contacted some collaborators in Belgium. We asked them for a matched sample, so people with the same characteristics as our participants, and we compared their questions. And these were people that have actually had near-death experiences. And we saw that the experience and most of the features of the near-death experience were pretty much similar.
Can you elaborate, actually, give us some details? What are these features? When you say I have a near-death experience, so what do they experience? Like what are the commonalities, I guess?
The typical commonalities that are said in near-death experience is this idea of an overwhelming sense of peace even though there's a notion of imminent death, a letting go, if you will, of sorts. This idea of going into a different realm or a different reality, seeing loved ones or seeing other type of beings during the experience, which is quite a common feature during DMT and ayahuasca experiences as well. Going through a dark tunnel, having a sense of being in a radically different other space or another time, like something like a paranormal aspect to the experience. So these are common features that have been seen. But it's interesting, once you get into the literature of near-death experience, you do see that there is some variation around these themes. Some studies have tried to check out, well, what are the most common features? This thing of peace, pleasantness appears to be quite a strong commonality among other things.
What does it mean then? So if there is this commonalities, and I think it's Rick Strassman in his book. Is it the DMT molecule? I don't remember the name of the book, but is it the proof that when we die, do we have a psychedelic experience then? Do we have like a hormones that is injected in our body and suddenly we get high when we die? Is it the conclusions?
No, we cannot make that strong link that DMT is being released in the brain when we die. The only thing that we can do with the study that we did is see if the experience is similar. So it's a psychological study, the realm of psychology. We're also conducting neuroscience experiments with DMT, but then again, that won't really allow us to check if there's actual what's happening during death or anything like this. The only way to assert that would be to have an invasive procedure in somebody who's about to die, or somebody willing to, give himself to science when he's about to die to see what's happening in his brain. But, nobody can do those studies, and of course it's not ethical to do them. So there are some theories around this, some neurobiological models. I am quite agnostic on this feature. I don't know if there is DMT being released in the system or not. It could be that the states, our bodily brain states, reach a similar state during the moment in which we encounter death, as well as the moment in which DMT is injected into a person. So these are other possibilities. A recent study also compared the effects of ketamine with near-death experience, and they also found a strong commonality there.
Wow. Okay.
Possibly, the ones that get reported in their database are these very intense K-hole-like experiences that happen with ketamine.
What we're trying to do is to bring more into people's consciousness from a point of view that sort of awareness of mortality, etc., can help us live better lives. And before you came on, Chris, I was talking to Olivier about the near-death experience that people have had, and Olivier was saying that the people who have had them have it's like they've almost rewired their brain on how to live their life after it in terms of their values and what's important and just their levels of happiness afterwards. I suppose where this becomes interesting with the DMT studies is if there are correlations in people who've had near-death experiences and DMT. Again, I'm going way down a line here, but could there be something at some point that says it's like taking DMT could make everyone a lot happier?
I think it could be reasonable to take some of that information and say that it's correct. So, for example, like we have some data on levels of mood, which is a broad indication of happiness, I guess, a very specific one. And we see that after our administration of DMT, people show that the symptoms of depression goes down, symptoms of anxiety goes down. They have increased feelings of gratitude as well. Overall, when you sometimes speak with participants, after, they also mention that they've reevaluated some things of their own history, their relationship with other people as well, and something that we've been seeing with psychedelics in general, and we have very good reasons to suspect that is the case with both DMT and ayahuasca, is that there's an increased connection or appreciation to nature. So this idea of nature relatedness. So this typical thing of the reassessment of values or social status or the things that matter in life versus those that don't, it's very reasonable to suspect that something similar happens with psychedelics. And when you think of things like the counterculture in the 60s and so on, and in a way what was the expression of that was also a reappreciation of values, but on a very massive scale, right? I would agree with that statement to a certain extent, but again, with a very big caveat that, you know, in our studies we select participants and serve them in the right way, and we know that these experiences can be psychologically safe and definitely physiologically safe when the right things are in place.
Without sort of further sort of empirical data, it still remains a philosophical proposition as I think at this stage.
What is very interesting for me is having tried ayahuasca before. By the way, ayahuasca is the combination of two plants mixed together, and you have a kind of a brew that you can drink, and you have this effect, these psychedelic effects for hours, 7 hours, 4 hours, it depends, but it's a long journey. What is very interesting to me is you don't do this for pleasure. It's kind of a difficult experience most of the time, meaning that you even vomit, you can even shit in your pants because, you know, it's difficult. So it's kind of a difficult thing. And what you experience as well is difficult vision, because I don't believe myself in out of worlds, and I'm a very atheist person. But what I can assume is you kind of access your unconscious, things that you repress. So most of the time what people will tell you is kind of difficult experience, like dark experience, like things that you need to, it's challenging experience most of the time. The paradox is by looking at this darkness, like death, well, you get something positive out of it. And that's, to me, that's the mind-blowing, well, not mind-blowing, but very interesting part of this thing. What do you think, Chris, about that?
I think that part of the experience and how ayahuasca puts you in such an extreme state in which you feel that you might die, or that there's the certainty on your proximity of death suddenly reduces to a point in which it becomes a very plausible thing. I think it really makes you reassess things on a massive scale. I think it's that really the extremeness of the state in which basically people are faced with this very hazardous condition, and this very primordial state, apparently, it seems, is something also very common among reports, in which people are stripped out of every sort of construction that they've made about their own identities. They face this notion of death. They're stripped into facing their own vomits, pieces or what have you, and also other people's around them. That can be hugely meaningful in a way. And on a psychological level, that makes a lot of sense to me. That is one of the main things happening during that experience. And also this sense, it has also been reported by some anthropologists, many people coming out of the experience, something that, especially this ayahuasca experience, something that really feels transformative is this notion that they're all suffering together. They're all going through this difficult experience together, collectively, and that also puts a very, very strong, meaningful aspect into the forefront, this very basic idea of humanity, dealing with the notion that we're gonna die, it's gonna happen, it becomes everybody's going through it at the same time.
Now today, with this denial of death, we explain something very kind of rational and objective and simple. When we face that, then something good happens. And today, when you talk about collective, today the collective is more denial, more happy picture, more happiness, more how can I get happy very easily, by looking at my Instagram. So there's more denial than accepting to face this death paradox. So
and life coaches.
Yeah, and life, typical
which
life
we're both trained in, by the way.
Yeah, and we refuse the typical life coaching style, which is, everything is amazing and positive, be cheerful. I think for us is, if we want to make this world a sane place, and even if we want to save ourselves from climate change and all these kind of things that happen, how much do we need to accept that? How much do we collectively need to face this mortality and to wake up, kind of? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I can I just like, should I put earphones on? Because I don't know how it's going to impact on your audio, the fact that
if you want to put them now, you can if you want. That's possible.
Would it be better for you if I do so?
Yeah, you can.
Just 1 second.
I think we should leave this bit in, actually. It's quite peaceful. Just this like little meditative sort of state feeling there. I could see the trees out Chris's window. It was all just getting very mellow. So it was like... now we'll have a brief interlude. It's like,
okay. I will put meditation music in the between. Yeah. Now we're back.
Well, it's good if you want to really distinguish yourself from the manic, life-affirming life coaches, right? A bit of a silence anxiety for your podcast listeners.
That's it. It's all about the balance, isn't it? At the end of the day, it's about the cycle. It's about, I can't stand it. It's when you only look at the good. It's the fact is you have to go through the shit sometimes to get to the good, and you can't just pretend the shit isn't there. At the end of it all is I was about to say, and is at the end of it all is the shittiest piece of all, but that's actually not true. Well, the point we're making is if you live a good enough life, then you're going to be more peaceful. It's not that you're going to accept it and you're going to be all happy about it, but there'll be an inner sense of knowing you've lived the way you wanted to live. There's less things you feel are left undone. So it almost becomes a voluntary passing as opposed to scrambling, sort of scratching your nails, trying to not be pulled over to the other side. So bringing it back to this then, I suppose it's that with that sort of connection with near-death experiences, DMT, I suppose, what can we learn from all of this? What can we learn from all of this about how to live in the first place?
Well, I think it's very much related to what you were saying a bit before. I think a huge part of being human is dealing with this capacity that we have to, in a way, simulate our future. And as part of the simulation comes with the inevitable notion that we're going to die. And apparently that is something very human, or at least we don't know to what extent other animals experience that. But apparently this is something that we can know. This notion is a very human thing. And the idea of connecting us with the inevitability of our deaths, or that this is something that is going to happen, is something that we have to face in a way anyway. And not facing it includes this manic notion of escaping it, of trying to seek ways in which we are unsuccessfully trying to avoid it. So if we have a means in which, or if we have tools, if you will, or technology that allows us to get us closer to this experience and makes us face these elements that we don't want to face, well, that is a good thing. In a way, the teaching, in a way, is a bit that this is something that makes us who we are. That's a part of life. There's nothing that we can do about it. So what is the best way that we can try facing this? And how can we enrich our lives with the notion of inevitability of death? Another way that we can try conceptualizing this is that death can be conceived as the ultimate transformation process that we have, in a way. Not that I'm implying some sort of transformation into some sort of other metaphysical reality or existence or so on.
Transform into compost, right?
Exactly.
Whatever the transformation is into, it's a transformation out of what we are now.
Exactly. And there's a radical uncertainty of that moment, in a way. And we can think that as humans, we have a tendency to fixate on things to try to stabilize things, to negate the aspect that reality and the world is completely dynamic, is always changing. The flux of everything is the way that things go about in the world, and that we are very resistant to change because of that, the way that we're wired, because of the way that we understand and we see the world. I think psychedelics on a very fundamental level show us that change is an inherent part of nature. It's an inherent part of reality in a way. And death is this ultimate change process, if you will. I would say that, yeah, that's one of the main teachings of we can get out of this whole idea that psychedelics can simulate death or that they can bring us closer to the notion. In the end, it's about change, and it's accepting change and embracing the possibilities that can come out after, out of that change that we experience in everyday life.
When I'm listening to you, I can see only benefits, right, about psychedelics,
Yeah.
And I assume that, well, some of the conclusion that you get from your studies, that there's positive effects about using these substances, and still you have huge prohibition and laws, very strict, that classify most of these substances as drugs, like they're classified as class 1 drugs, which means that apparently they have no effects whatsoever. They are harmful and they have no benefits out of it. But it seems that there are some benefits out of it.
Yeah.
And so what's the objective here, Chris? Is there, like, for you something about showing the benefits? Do you have like an ambition about that? Because quite frankly, when I hear you talking, I want to open like centers, like to say, face death via psychedelics, something like that. I just like, I can see like a business idea. Sorry, I'm just joking here. But, no.
Well, many people are thinking like that.
It's a new commodity. Let's sell. Yeah.
Well, I think it's important to have like always a balanced approach. I think psychedelics are not necessarily a panacea. They're not going to fix everything. They're not going to make everything automatically right. There's some phenomena associated with sometimes excessive use of ayahuasca that is out there, the idea of spiritual bypassing, which is also kind of like a manic reaction in the opposite direction. People just going on and on into the experience, and there seems to be this notion that, now I'm illuminated, I don't need to resolve anything from my life, I don't need to work on my personal relationships and so on. So this is the other, the other side of this whole thing, which is very much present, and which is also a dissociation, escapism from daily concerns through this entering into this other mystical, very sugary, valued sort of alternate space. And this is where the importance of mediation comes into place. Psychedelics are extremely susceptible to contextual things. So the effects that people experience during psychedelics are not just the effects of the drug, but it's a combination of the drug, the dose, the physical context they're in, if there's a ritual or not, if there is an intention that they have when they go in, and you can even scale this up into the culture that they're immersed in. Yeah, for these reasons, and it is why when we're going into the space of research into psychedelics, potential benefits, in what way it can help human beings and so on, we need to do it with all this inquiry, all this research, which is not just about science, it's also about anthropology, it's about art, it's about all the ways that we human beings basically make meaning out of things and try to, in a way, experiencing them.
I think without all that, without being cognizant of all that, it does just become another commodity, another crutch, another escape, it just becomes more of the same as so many other things, whether it's food or it's alcohol, or whether it's drugs or Netflix or sex or whatever it might be. It's just finding something else to sort of plug that gap, rather than, as you said, in the right context, it can bring out and add and recreate something that's positive and worthwhile.
Absolutely. And that's why, in a way, it's important to keep it as an open inquiry all the time, not to fixate on this idea of what they are, and we close the gap, or we try to narrow the focus on and on and on, and say, well, psychedelics do this, just do that, they're bad for this, but for that. But keeping that open space of inquiry seems to be like a very healthy thing to do, because in a way it's still could be considered a relatively new dimension of experience, at least in the West at the moment. Yeah, it seems very relevant, and there's also why the importance of doing all these things was also part of the question. I think in a very, very broad way, psychedelics appear to open up a possibility of human experience that we're just beginning to understand, or we're beginning to know. And there's something fundamentally important about exploring that in a safe and efficient way.
If you don't take baby steps with it and ease and ease and ease, then it only takes something to, if something's rushed or comes out too quickly or isn't thought about, then suddenly the whole idea of the research, the concept, any kind of investment, it's just going to be put into the bad box, and then we potentially lose all the good stuff.
Exactly.
We hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Again, please support the show by signing up at deathhangout.com or clicking on the subscribe button on your screen.